November 19th, Roy Campanella. Have you ever heard of him? If you pay attention to Billy Joel's song, it'll say Campanella. On November 19th of 1953, Roy Campanella was voted the National League's most valuable player. And that was the second time in his career that he was named MVP of the National League. I think they're going to announce that today or tomorrow for this year's baseball. And the guy from the Cubs is supposed to be the leading candidate for the National League MVP. They pick a National League MVP and an American League MVP. Unlike the NFL that picks one most valuable player. So you have one in each league. It's a big honor. And Roy Campanella won it for the second time. Anybody know who he played for? Roy Campanella used to be in the East and now is in the West. Moved the team about, broke the hearts of the people of Brooklyn. Brooklyn Dodgers. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, who originated in Brooklyn, New York, and were later moved all the way across the country, became the Los Angeles Dodgers, and broke the hearts of Brooklyn forever. Okay, that's what happened on November 19th. On November 24th, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, on national television, a Wisconsin senator by the name of Joseph McCarthy accused the Truman administration of crawling with communists when he was president. So on the 24th of November, on national television, a senator from Wisconsin by the name of Joseph McCarthy accused the Truman administration of crawling with communists during the time that President Truman was in office. He was a guy that you're going to find out that's going to go after all the communists that he believes lives in the United States. And he's going to make some incredible accusations before it's over, and we'll talk about that later. So on November 24th of 1953, on national television, Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy accused the Truman administration, when the president was the president, of his administration crawling with communists. Okay, December 16th. This is kind of interesting. Can you imagine this today? On December 16th, for the first time in American history, the White House allowed the media to print direct quotes from press conferences in their newspapers. Prior to that, if the president said something in a press conference, the media could not print it in their newspapers. So, on December 16th, 1953, for the first time in American history, the White House allowed the media to print any direct quotes made by anyone during a press conference in the White House. Usually it was either the president or his representative, vice president or his press secretary. But they could actually quote it in the paper. Now this will throw you for a loop when you think about today. On December 27th of 1953, the Detroit Lions won the NFL championship. They won 17-16 over which team that's pitiful today?
Browns.
The Cleveland Browns. That wasn't the way it used to be. So believe it or not, on December 27th of 1953, the Detroit Lions won the NFL championship with a 17-16 victory over, believe it or not, the Cleveland Browns. Okay, that's 1953 at a glance. Let's tell you a few things that went on. Okay, that'll take us to the Joseph McCarthy issue, which is the menace of McCarthyism. The menace of McCarthyism. This is quite a story.
So were these the first of the notes or were these the first of the notes or the last set, the first of the notes that you normally would have gave yourself?
We would actually we started with the Kennedy presidency. So it's a good point. When we get done with this, then we'll have a test, and then we'll start where I started at the start of the year last year. So we'll get there though. We'll work. Okay. Well, we talked about McCarthyism, and that was his continual assault upon the Truman administration, stating publicly that his administration was crawling with communists. Okay. Well, it started in the early 1950s, but it continued through the Eisenhower administration also. And basically what happened is during the Truman administration, Joseph McCarthy began to charge that high government officials were sympathetic with communism. That's what he was charging. And the first official that he really attacked, which you'll hear more about later when we get to the Cuban Missile Crisis, believe it or not, was Secretary of State Dean Acheson. I actually have a signed photo of him. Now, I gotta get my stuff together because I gotta remember where I put these things. But right here, this is Dean Acheson right here. And here's a signed card of him, but that's Dean Acheson. And he was Secretary of State under Truman. And he was the first one that McCarthy kind of went after. He attacked Secretary of State Dean Acheson. Now guess who was poking, guess who, go ahead.
Why are we so against communism?
Well, because, I mean, there are people, we'll get into that. When they start setting up Sputnik, we'll get in and say that we became very paranoid of communism. We thought they were going to take over the entire world and we were going to be communists. I'm not kidding you. Now, let's think about this. You always got to have a code holder when you're on a rampage. Now, my definition of a code holder is if I'm talking with Talon, and I can see that Talon and Kyle are having a little bit of conflict, and I portray myself as a friend of Talon's, but really I'm not. I kind of see they have kind of a conflict going, so I'm egging him on. Hey, he said something about your gal back there in Oregon. I'm not kidding you. Oh yeah, he said, well here, I see this all the time.
Well, this is why. This is why.
What a life.
Did he break up with her?
Yes.
Oh, well, anyway, maybe he was right. Anyway, you gotta let me know these things, god dang. Anyway, so let's read. You gotta let me know these things. Listen, son, we're close here. We're close. I'm not gonna ask you whose move it was, but anyway, let's rephrase that. Let's turn it around here a little bit. I'm really feeling bad. Anyway, let's say it didn't happen and we're talking. So anyway, so he's trying to egg a fight on with Kyle. And I'm his buddy. And I say, yeah, he said this, he said that, we'll change that. Maybe he said something about your shoes. Anyway, they're going back and forth, and I get him all riled up, and then he goes over and fights Kyle, and I hold his coat while he does it. Okay? I'm stirring it up, but I'm not going to get involved. So you got to have somebody that's kind of helping stir this up. You'll never guess who is encouraging McCarthy to have this assault on Truman's administration. Think back. Who might you think was giving him the needle to do it? You think Dewey, you're close. If it wasn't Dewey, who was it? Mr. Republican, Robert Taft. So, sorry about that, Tal. McCarthy was the one that was being strongly encouraged by Republican Senator Robert Taft. Obviously, he was a presidential candidate in '52, right? We talked about that. And even though he continued to bite on the Democratic Party in 48, 50, he really got McCarthy going in the early 1950s. Continue your assault against the Democratic Party. Now he's going to be a code holder because you can bet your last dollar that Taft is going to know nothing about this when it gets to when the rubber meets the road. But anyway, so what happened is in 1951, McCarthy was attacking Secretary of State Dean Acheson, saying he was sympathetic to communists. And he even went after General George C. Marshall. And Marshall might have been considered one of the greatest patriots in American history. We didn't talk a lot about him in World War II, but he was involved. He was the one that lots of times would write the letters back to the soldiers that were killed, to their families. But anyway, George C. Marshall was a patriot. #1 patriot maybe in the country. McCarthy even went after Marshall, saying he was sympathetic to communism. And I mean, he continued his relentless hunt for communists. He attacked influential people. He attacked actors, writers, educators. He just put an assault on everyone, stating that they were sympathetic to communists. Well, a lot of Americans kind of praised McCarthy for what they considered to be his patriotic zeal. You know, he was trying to push communism out of the country. And by the end of 1953, a national poll reported that more than 50% of Americans actually supported what he was doing. But he was hitting below the belt with a lot of different people accused him of being communist or sympathetic to communism. Well, he really was doing pretty well. He was kind of at the height of his power by the end of 1953. He was getting people to listen to him. But in January of 1954, he went too far. And what he did is he began to attack the Secretary of the Army, Robert Stevens. Everybody else just kind of paid no attention to him. or blew him off. They chose not to what? Respond. Well, I'm telling you, when he went after the Secretary of the Army, Robert Stevens, the United States Army did not sit still. They responded. They counterattacked against Senator McCarthy. Well, the Army fought back and they accused Senator McCarthy of something. And he said, you know, Army said, Senator McCarthy, you tried to use your influence with all these people that support you to force our Army to give preferential treatment to one of your staff members. Is that a real serious charge? Not really, but what did McCarthy do? He took the bait. Okay? So, the Army accused Senator McCarthy of using his influence to force the Army to give preferential treatment to one of his staff members. And this charge by the Army, which is really kind of stupid, frankly, angered McCarthy so much that he demanded a public hearing. And those public hearings between McCarthy and the United States Army became known as the Army-McCarthy hearings. You have a question here?
They accuse him of using influence to force the Army to
give one of his staff members preferential treatment. In other words, you ever seen somebody do that? You know, I'm pretty important here, so if you do this for me, I'll do this for you, or if you don't do this, I'm going to do this to you. You know, that type of thing. Well, that's what the Army accused McCarthy of doing. Really not that big of a deal, but they knew he'd react the way he did. So he demands these public hearings, and these public hearings become known in history as the Army-McCarthy hearings. And these things were nationally televised over a 35-day period of time, and they estimated that maybe 20 million viewers watched these Army-McCarthy hearings, which he pressed. Okay? So, he presses these hearings, he's mad about this accusation. They broadcast these hearings for 35 days, and they figured as many as 20 million people watched. Well, before these hearings were over, that 50% of support he had dwindled to basically nothing for these three reasons. Okay? So before the hearings were over, McCarthy had completely destroyed himself with the American public for these three reasons. Now, it's pretty easy now, you think about it. It's pretty easy for Keller to say something uncomplimentary about Kyle over in that hallway with two people listening, rather than if he said it in front of the entire student body in the gym, right? So what has happened is McCarthy's gained this popularity by the people because they really don't know what he said one-on-one, right? They're just hearing this. So they think, oh, this guy's awesome. He's, you know, raising some trouble, kicking some butt. So he had support. Well, when he got up in front of national television and people began to see him for what he was, these are the three reasons why he was destroyed. First of all, he had a very continual sarcasm. He was very sarcastic during the hearings, and that turned people off. They were turned off by his continual sarcasm. Even angered Americans on how sarcastic he was about this whole thing. Another thing he did during these hearings is he wouldn't let other people give their opinion or their statements. He would continually interrupt. Is that what I'm doing to you? Is that your pet peeve? What's that?
Who does that sound like to you?
Me? Donald Trump? Okay, well there you go. Thank you for that compliment. Anyway, that's a good analogy. His endless interruptions annoyed Americans. As they were trying to get through these hearings, he kept interrupting. That's a very good point, girls. I've never had anybody say that. Of course, we've never had Trump running for president this year. But you've seen interruptions before, but his were really annoying, are they not? Yeah. So people saw that for 35 days. And then they finally figured him out, and it kind of ties into this campaign a little bit too, is this continual unsupported accusations really turned America off too. Okay? Because it was okay for people to hear this on the outside that Bailey Gibbons was doing this, that means she's a communist. But when he had to stand in front of 20 million viewers and say it, and they saw how unsupported what he was saying against the people were, it turned them off. So after his continual sarcasm, his endless interruptions, and his continued unsupported accusations, Americans turned against him. And he appeared to be really more of a villain than a hero, and he lost all of the support that he had. Well, finally, on December 2nd of 1954, the United States Senate, because what is he? He's a senator. On December 2nd of 1954, the United States Senate voted 67 to 22 to censure McCarthy. That's on your ID sheet, I think, isn't it? Yeah, to censure McCarthy. On December 2nd of 1954, the United States Senate, which he's a member of because of his actions, voted 67 to 22 to censure McCarthy. What's censure mean? Not remove him,
Shut him up.
reprimand him. Okay, if I do something wrong and Mr. Smith feels like that it wasn't in the best interest of education, he would put a letter in my file stating exactly what I did and that I better not do it again. That's a reprimand. If you get too many reprimands, then you might get fired. So but getting a reprimand or a censure in the Senate is really a black mark against you. Okay, it's not good. And so basically when he was censured on December 2nd of 1954 by a vote of 67 to 22, his career as a senator was over. He was condemned by the Senate, at least 67 members, who said that he had conduct unbecoming a member. So 67 out of 89, is that my math? Basically somebody must have it right. That's your math. Anyway, they all considered his conduct unbecoming a member. Well, if all of a sudden 67 out of 89 think you stink, your power is gone. Well, what did he turn to after his censure? He went and got a few of those mulligan shots. And he turned to alcoholism. And it did him in. He died at the age of 48 of alcoholism. Okay? So his public censure by the United States Senate after the Armin McCarthy hearings did him in. He was censured, reprimanded, his career was over, he turned to the bottle and died of alcoholism at the age of 48. Went down history as a guy that was, he really showed that he might even have been unstable during those hearings. He was so off the wall. And I think he really was off the wall anyway. When you accuse Dean Acheson, when you'll learn more about Dean Acheson because he's going to be involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the guy's not a communist. You know what I mean? And then what he's suggesting to President Kennedy to do in Cuba is not communist. It would be exactly the opposite. So this guy was a little off his rocker. Okay, when we continue on, I want to make this point to you. We're going to talk about President Eisenhower and his idea of civil rights. He was a stand-patism person in civil rights. He didn't do anything. But some things happened during his term of importance. Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, which desegregated schools. And Rosa Parks comes into history during the Eisenhower presidency. Two important things. So we'll continue with that tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit about how we think the election's going to go here.